Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Myth and Culture, the online course. I'm Dr. Michael Zimmerman. I'll be your instructor, and this is the beginning of Unit 1. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to introduce yourselves on the course forums, as well as to go over all of the information that you need from the syllabus and from the course intro page. Now, if you've already been on this section for Unit 1, you've already seen the first two questions that I've given you. Basically, I put this statement up on the board saying the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a myth. And then I asked you two questions regarding this. Why might someone be offended by this statement? And what does this tell us about the way most people define myth? Well, most of you know why someone would be offended by this statement. Because in the way that most people define myth as something which is not true. We call this the popular definition of myth, an unfounded or false notion, idea, or story. This, in particular, is an ethnocentric way to define myth. Ethnocentrism is the concept that one evaluates other cultures according to our own cultural preconceptions, originating in the standards and customs of one's own culture. So we are perfectly comfortable saying that the stories of Zeus or Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey from ancient Greece are myths because they're not in the past or they're from another culture and therefore not relevant to our own belief systems. But that's because we're looking at things from our own point of view, and not from the point of the view of the culture from which the myth originates. Take a look for a second at this cartoon. Here we have two individual people, both thinking the same thing about each other. But we can see that their approach is based upon their own cultural perspectives. The young woman in the bathing suit is saying of the Muslim woman, well, everything is covered but her eyes. This is a cruel male-dominated culture. She doesn't have the choice. She doesn't have the agency to dress how she wishes. Whereas the Muslim woman with the covering is saying, well, nothing's covered but her eyes. You know, she's displaying her body. This is showing how cruel and male-dominated the culture of modern America is, with its over-sexualization and so forth. So they're looking at each other not on an equal playing field, but according to their own customs. This is sort of like the old joke about the chicken crossing the road. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. Well, what exactly is the other side? It happens to be the side that you yourself are not on. So it's all a matter of perspective. We all do little bits of ethnocentrism every day. For example, we might say about England that over in England they drive on the quote-unquote wrong side of the road. But from their perspective, we in America are the ones who drive on the wrong side of the road. This is not the way in which anthropologists define mythology. Anthropologists define myths as a sacred story central to the belief system and values of a given people, culture, or religion. So according to the anthropological definition of myth, saying that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a myth is entirely applicable in this way. Not because, as you might popularly say, it's outdated or false or untrue, but because it's a story from the Bible, it's sacred to Christians everywhere, and is central to Christian belief systems, values, and way of thinking. One of the reasons why anthropologists define myth in this way, without addressing the trueness or validity of this myth in any way, or the trueness or the untrueness, or whether or not the myth is right or wrong, is because anthropologists want to approach things from a perspective of cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is an anthropological concept. It's the idea that a person's beliefs, values, and practices should best be understood based on that person's own culture, rather than being judged against the criteria of another. In other words, it's sort of like the golden rule of anthropology. Treat other people's ideas and belief systems the way you would want your own to be treated, and treat them on an even level. As such, this allows anthropologists to look at myths that are profoundly different than those found in their own culture and still appreciate them and learn about them from the point of view of the cultures that they come from. There's a particular reason why we focus on cultural relativism rather than ethnocentrism, which is practical as well. The key focus of anthropology is learning about other cultures. If you have an emotional attitude that your own race, ethnicity, nation, culture, language, or really any other cultural aspect is superior to all others, then this shines through when interacting with people from cultures which do not necessarily mirror your own. As such, we want to take a look at myths from a cultural relativistic perspective, as sacred stories central to their belief system and values, and just as important to people of the culture from which the myth comes as our own myths are to us. As such, this allows for open and free communication between anthropologists and people of other cultures, as well as opening us up to new experiences and allowing us to dispel stereotypes about other cultures and modes of behavior.